Welcome back to Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. I'm Jack Llewellyn. Thanks for joining me. We are going to go in a completely different direction than was intended for today, in part because we're going to talk about the news of the day, but we'll leave that as a cliffhanger and talk about that in a couple of minutes. First of all, and before we really get started, a little bit of news. Last week, this little podcast went over 300,000 downloads. As I've said many times, that doesn't put me in competition with Joe Rogan. Not that I'm in competition with anybody, but 300,000 means an awful lot to me. So I thank everyone who has listened to these podcasts, recommended them, written in, given me comments. I appreciate it and look forward to the next big milestone on downloads. I want to talk for just a couple minutes about El País. Jorge Humberto Figueroa Benitez, L27 or El País. Remember, we talked about him a little bit last week. According to some, El País replaced El Nini after he was arrested as the leader or a leader of the security forces for Los Chapitos. And it's been said that he was the one who physically tied up El Mayo, put him in the back of the pickup truck that took him to the airport, where he was then put on the plane and flown to the United States. There's been a little bit of discussion about El País since those stories came out. A couple of things of interest, I think. One which leads directly into the topic of the day. While there's been some debate amongst folks of whether or not El País actually replaced El Nini, there is absolutely no question that in the last few months, his importance within the Sinaloa Cartel has expanded dramatically. As we noted last week, to me, that indicates that Joaquin may not have been acting on his own when he set up the transaction or the purported meeting and then had El Mayo abducted. Nevertheless, it's also important to know that El País, or L27, had been fairly well known within the circle of people who know about these things, in part because he was very prominent in the Culiacan in 2019. He was the person in charge of repelling military forces with a .50 caliber Barrett rifle. The whole idea was to pressure for the release of Mayito Guzman, and it did happen. But that .50 caliber gun was prominently displayed in a number of videos around that time, and so El País became fairly well known again within those circles. So much so that he has a narco corrido about him. It's performed by Luis Conriquez and Nivel C. And it says, amongst other things, or the lyrics amongst other things say, they remember the Culiacanazo, I'm the one with the toston who was lying on his chest while shelled earth. I burned cartridges, knocking down guachos. Cheyenne Azul came to rescue him. Okay. The name of the corridor is L27 O El País. So, that goes to his nicknames and aliases. Remember the federal indictment coming from the grand jury, Southern District of New York, April of 2023. That's when Los Chapitos were re-indicted, and we've talked about the issues surrounding that and kind of the curious nature of that grand jury indictment. The indictment named Los Chapitos and associates of Los Chapitos, and that included El País. So that leads into the topic of the day, or the news of the day, as you will. So I'm recording this on Monday, September 9th, 2024. Normally I do these on Friday or Saturday. This weekend had a few issues, couldn't get them done. Worked out well for me because we have this topic today. Let me back up. Several reports of violence in Culiacan starting early this morning. And I'm going to give you a couple of reports from Mexican newspapers or Mexican media websites that talk about this. From El Universal, in the clashes between civilians and later against the army that began in the state capital and spread to the Costa Rican syndicate, 4 people were injured, including 2 soldiers, 1 person killed inside a motor unit, and 12 vehicles violently stripped away. The new acts of violence that were focused on the eastern part of Culiacan and replicated in rural areas generated unrest. So businesses opened their doors 2 hours after their normal hours, and the transportation service was disrupted on 3 routes since drivers temporarily stopped their activities. Because of the events that began very early in the La Campiña subdivision in the eastern part of Culiacan, Governor Ruben Roca Moya ordered to cancel classes in both shifts in the state capital and the syndicate of Costa Rica. From El País, Culiacan has dawned again this Monday under the siege of violence. Sinaloa authorities have reported new clashes between, quote, armed civilians, close quote, and elements of the army in the area of La Campiña, east of the state capital. The governor has asked the population to remain calm and has announced the suspension of classes of the morning shift in the city. 2 soldiers have been wounded in the shootings, according to state government, which has not announced if they had made any arrests. Culiacan is calm, Roca said, although he admitted that there were also incidents of violence in other surrounding communities. Although the state governor has said there were no deaths, the prosecutor office later confirmed that 1 person had died in the Las Vegas neighborhood, but did not clarify if he was involved in the morning shootings or if he was a collateral victim or if he was killed in another incident. Elements of the Mexican army in support of public security detected the presence of armed civilians, Roca said. And then in response to media echoing news about the events and stuff, Roca apparently snapped and said they exaggerate too much. I'll note that the deceased person was found with a gunshot wound on the side of Federal Highway 15, and you'll know why that's important in a moment. So we have other reports. InfoBay has some reports. There are also discussions from or announcements from the Ministry of Public Security, again referring to confrontations between armed civilians and other reports. So what we have is fairly consistent news reports in Mexico about violent confrontations between armed civilians in and around Culiacan. Later reports suggested that 1 officer or 1 soldier or perhaps 2 may have been reported dead. All right. So, new violence in Culiacan. What does it mean? Well, numerous sources, including Borderland Beat, have circulated audio messages that appear to confirm that Mayito Flaco, the new leader of the Mayo Zambada section of the Sinaloa Cartel, following El Mayo's arrest and transport to the United States. But Mayito Flaco has authorized his hitmen to attack Los Chapitos in the city of Culiacan. Again, this is from various audios, and if you want to look at them, go to Borderland Beat. You can listen to some. I found a couple online already. They, all of the normal hallmarks of real, valid audios supporting the notion that Mayito Flaco has basically declared war on Los Chapitos in Culiacan. Interestingly, in a recent article from El Imparcial, the paper noted that unlike his father, who was seen as a negotiator, it said that Mayito Flaco is more, quote, inclined towards violent armed confrontation. The other thing to know about Mayito is, in addition to fentanyl, the DEA has for years pointed to him as being the person in charge of moving methamphetamine shipments from Asia to Mexico with a final destination of the United States. Dozens of videos, have circulated on social media showing the presence of armored vehicles said to be from the Mayo Zambada organization or Mayo Zambada group patrolling in Culiacan. Other sources are suggesting that Los Rusos have joined the offensive against Los Chapitos. And the last I heard, or last I saw from some of these allegedly firsthand reports, are that significantly heavy fighting is continuing along Highway 15 in Culiacan. In addition, there are numerous videos showing government convoys arriving in Culiacan, and there are also a number of videos showing violent clashes. So you can see the one I saw just recently was a truck with bullet holes in the windshield still driving through other military vehicles. So what do we have, folks? As of right now, we have all of the hallmarks that the violence that we thought might occur after Joaquin was involved in the abduction, he might have organized the abduction and transportation to the United States of El Mayo. Remember, at the time, the question was, how do El Mayo's supporters, how does the El Mayo faction respond? And we may have that answer now. Obviously, things have just started. This is only one day. Perhaps this dies out quickly. Does this represent a long-term path forward? And how does this affect the Sinaloa Cartel's footholds in other locations in Mexico, particularly those where they are struggling against other groups, particularly CJNG, for territory and power, places such as Chiapas and others. So, we want to wait and see, look at what's going to happen. That's a quick version, and I wish I had a whole lot more to tell you, but that's all we really know at this moment, or at least all I know. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this on a short episode today and open up the distinct possibility of having another short episode in a day or two to discuss whatever happens next, or perhaps we will recap all of this next weekend. In any event, thanks for joining for this essentially a news update. Thank you again for 300,000 downloads. If you have additional information, if you know more, and I want to point out, there's a couple of great sources on this kind of information. Remember, I already mentioned a couple of the newspapers, the websites that I go to all the time. Borderline Beat, of course, does a great job, especially of kind of aggregating information. Ewan Grio always has good information on his website, so look at those places as well if you're interested in this. Otherwise, I'll try and keep you posted. Again, thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode of Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena, whenever that happens to be. Take care, everyone.